Let's all do specialised.
Okay. He's all seen them.
No,
Feel vanilla.
Gosh, no, it's not just the E. Whatever it is.
Say something at the end, okay? Colleagues, can we please make a start by reminding you all that this meeting will be webcast and is being webcast for live and subsequent broadcast by the council's meeting on the YouTube site, and that members of the press or public may record or take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. And I don't expect there to be any of the latter. With that, can I go to item 2 on the agenda and ask if there are any apologies? I know of 2, Councillor Akak Ahmed and Councillor Mick Brown. No others? Okay. Declarations of interest. The reminder to declare all relevant and pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests from the business regarding the business to be discussed. Are there any declarations? There are none. The action notes that came from the last meeting. The question is, are there any issues that you feel that we need to pick up from the action notes that may not be coming up in the agenda to follow? Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see whether or not it's mentioned in the action notes, but we did have a discussion last time around in respect of domestic violence and what scrutiny that should be looked at on. And Councillor Yip and I both suggested that it should sit on coordinating work plan. And the chair sort of asked me to go away and have a think about how best we might progress that. So I have gone away and had a think about that. But what we know, it's a cross-cutting issue. I think that even if the domestic violence policy was going to want scrutiny to be looked at, it wouldn't necessarily be where it needs to be in terms of the other scrutiny committees. So, for instance, children education, homes and neighbourhoods. So I think that we would be doing a real injustice to that area if it wasn't on our overarching work plan. So that's what I would suggest, that we resolve to take up domestic violence issue through the coordinating committee. I'd also like
It is on the action notes, Kerry.
Oh, it is, okay.
It's page 5 of the action notes.
Great, thank you. But I'd also like to suggest that we ask Councillor Yip to take that work forward, have a think about how best we might progress that through co-ord. He's happy to do that. I'd be happy to work with him on that if this committee agreed that to that proposal for a way forward.
Let's take the principle to begin with, and then there's a second suggestion that follows on. Are members agreeable then that the matter is held by coordinating rather than ask one of the 2 other ONS committees to take it on? Yes. Okay. Neither one way or the other, really, but okay, let's accept the suggestion that's come from Kerry Jenkins, and the second I will deal with rather than Kerry. Alex, are you happy enough to take on that role?
I'm very happy to.
I know you've been working very closely with Kerry on this in the past.
We work together very well in the children's scrutiny, and I think, as Councillor Jenkins says, it does cross a number of scrutinies. I'm delighted to take the lead on this. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Matter resolved. Okay. If there is nothing else on the action notes, can we turn to item 5? Can I say to begin with that Wendy Griffiths, the Assistant Director of Customer Services and Business Support on the Customer Service Programme, is with us online. I was advised yesterday, Wendy, you had a very bad cold, and you did.
That's correct.
On members or officers sitting present at this meeting. So I think we should acknowledge that to start with. But I would, Wendy, like to say a few words to begin before I ask you to introduce the report. Wendy provided me with a copy of the report in advance of the papers being published for committee, but then went on leave. So I wasn't able to discuss with Wendy some aspects of the report. One thing I did say to the officers I managed to get together to talk about the report was I thought it was a very, very good report. The way that it is written, the way that it is formatted, the information that it provides. I think there is some very revealing statistical information there, which almost makes me a little ashamed, really, that, for example, on the complaint side, the level of complaints was much, much higher than anybody had anticipated, because we were hiding stuff away, really, because they were in silos, and we weren't collecting things on a corporate basis. I think, therefore, what this report is doing is opening up some ways forward, a second phase, if you like, of the programme, and we'll come to that later. So I think I'm saying that as chair because what I wouldn't want to do here is for members to shoot the messenger, i.e. to shoot at Wendy, because I think she is bringing forward a report which will allow us to build something fairly substantial in terms of changes within the council and progress on some of the matters which members certainly feel at times very, very keen to get resolved, because it's the daily churn of activity which is reported to them by residents is often the most concerning aspect of our role as councillors. So that was by way of introduction, Wendy. I hope you're okay with all of that. And can I ask you now if you introduce the report, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. And apologies again, councillors, that I can't be there in person. I thought you wouldn't appreciate me sharing this lurgy with you today. So I will do my best to summarise the report. I will share this on the screen. I know that everybody copy of it. See the screen, and we will be able to share this with you. So I will just attempt to do that now. And hopefully you will be able to follow this on the screen with me. Okay, so hopefully, can everybody see that on the screen? Has that come through? Okay?
Wendy, it's going to be very difficult. I noticed the problem yesterday when I was in committee rooms 3 and 4. This is a big room. That screen should be double the size that it is, and it's a matter, Christian, that I think you should take onwards. If you go into committee room 6, that screen is fine. If you go into the HMS Daring room, the screen size is fine, but that screen size is far, far too small for this room. You can make out the headlines, Birmingham City Council,
it's like an eye test, isn't it?
Honestly. But we've probably all got it in front of us on laptops, Wendy, so
okay,
don't be
fabulous.
too disturbed.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so I will do my best to summarise this. It's really in the question. So the report is in 2 parts. The first part covers the customer service programme, which we launched in January 22 on the back of all the previous work and detail that we've discussed at Overview and Scrutiny, frankly, around driving up customer service standards across the council. The second part is the council's complaints process, which was revised and refreshed, and we launched a single system and a new process in April 21. So I'll take, if it's okay, the customer programme activity first, and then we will cover off, and because they are really, really linked in terms of standards and quality, and one really is in support of the other. So just to provide a bit of context, the history of customer contact at Birmingham City Council. When we talk about customer services, it's important that this is not just about the customer service that's provided through the contact centre. So in the context of Birmingham City Council, over 1,200 services that we do offer, there's 25 of them that are managed through the contact centre. So when I'm talking about the customer service programme, I'm talking about all 1,200 services and how we drive up standards across all of those services, regardless of where and how the calls or the emails are handled. So the background here is that we had an outsourced contact centre, and in 2006 we brought that back into the council. So we insourced in 2014, and we had a refreshed strategy and a new website in 2016, and we saw the introduction of things like Brum accounts so that people could transact online if they chose to. That only, again, attributed to those services that were at that point managed within the contact centre. And so what this programme does, we've refreshed the strategy and said, actually, we acknowledge that all customers should be able to access any of our services through their channel of choice, whether it be online, over the phone, face to face. And the new customer strategy is about how do we achieve that? And how do we raise the standards in terms of what that looks like across the council? We know from previous programmes that we've got lots of lessons that we can learn. We know that we did not provide consistently high quality customer services, and in some areas the offer is quite traditional, and we don't necessarily have an online or a face-to-face offer, and sometimes we do have examples of calls that aren't answered quickly enough, and people get handed around from one department to the next. And so an in-depth review really supported what customers were already telling us in terms of that service activity. We identified a programme, and we had approval through Cabinet for £1.6 million of budget funding to focus on some key priority areas, and they were housing, waste, highways, revenues and benefits, education and skills, and bereavement services. We've created a new strategy, a customer service strategy, so that we can hang that, the activity that we do onto a framework. And the principles of our digital strategy were absolutely instrumental in informing how and what we offer in terms of putting customers at the heart of everything that we do. Now, we know that we have a number of commitments as part of the strategy, and I won't read them all out, but ultimately it is about serving customers in a way that they wish to be served through their channel of choice. And so we had to look at this organisationally because each department was in a very different place. So we've got fix the basics, raise the standards and set the standards. And we've set out a list of commitments about how we will deliver that. We are very much in fix the basics mode, is what I would say. And so through some discovery work that we've already undertaken, where we've looked at the whole customer experience end to end around waste management, housing and bereavement services and highways, we know that we can do better, and we need to make sure that we improve satisfaction in those areas. We've created a common gold standard. So what does that customer experience need to look like? And we've tried to make that pictorial so that people can really see. So it's things like if a customer reports a pothole and we've already got a report of that, that should be able to be done by a phone or on an app, over the phone or face to face. And what does that gold standard actually look like? When we developed that, and we've used a customer panel, citizens that have accessed our services before, and we've talked to members and we've talked to customers about, well, what does this mean? What does gold standard mean? And we've got some real common themes that have come through the research. So communication when interacting with council services. Customers don't necessarily understand why we make the decisions that we do. We could be more proactive, and we need to treat people empathetically. So what does good look like? And we've had to really articulate what that means on a service by service basis to give examples of what's good and what's bad. And as we roll that out as part of trying to reach 11,000 employees, almost taking them back to basics to say, this is what good customer service looks like. We will go out and we will launch that training. But what we'll also do is, for each service that we work with, where we look at the whole end-to-end experience, it's not just about how the phones are handled, it's about the quality of the service that's provided. And we're creating recommendations for each department that says, actually, if we're going to be gold standard, these are the things at the moment that we're not doing well enough. Some of that will be technology, some of that will be telephony, some of that will be customer service standards, but some of that will be reconfiguring how we actually manage and get the best efficiencies out of the service provision that we offer. So some of that will require fundamental service change using data, insight and customer intelligence to inform what we do moving forward. So the next phase of work, as we start to complete the discovery activity, starting with those high volume areas where we know we've got high levels of dissatisfaction, is to, as I said, culture change. We need every single staff member to understand and go back to basics about what does this mean in terms of a high quality customer care and how do we provide it and put people first. Web content needs to be reviewed. We know from some of the services that we're working with, there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of content that need to be refreshed or deleted. Customers can't necessarily serve themselves at the moment, because if they were to Google, a housing activity, there's 380 pages of content for housing alone. And if we look at some of the other services, they've got similar numbers where pages have been added year after year, but it's really difficult to navigate and find what you're looking for. People compare us now to the likes of Google and Amazon, where you press a button, it tells you what you need to get to, and you get there really quickly. And the council website should be no different to that in terms of making sure that it's accessible and meets the needs of all citizens that wish to use it from a disability and equality perspective, but also from a gender and a race perspective in terms of language barriers. We're working with bereavement services, waste and housing to look at the end-to-end experience. As I said, we've played back a number of recommendations, and we've also launched a customer panel to give customers a voice and make sure they've got an active role in shaping what we do. So we've got a huge amount of work that's happening behind the scenes. We're sort of 7 months into a 12-month programme. It links up and into the fit for purpose portfolio. So we need to make sure that we continue to govern ourselves and that we're on the right track. But some of the achievements that we've done so far is that we've actually got our refresh strategy. It's in easy read formats. We've got a customer charter. We've had that signed off by a suite of customers that have utilised our services before. We've cleared 166 PDF forms that were out of date off the website. We've looked at the Brum account and said, well, actually skip licensing, highways licensing, drop curbs, fly tipping, benefits online. Some of those activities were not able to be picked up through an online channel, which we've now been able to make sure that we can serve customers in a different way. We've also migrated home to school transport customer contact into the contact centre, so that for this year the calls were handled by the call centre team, making sure that customers were served and that phones were answered, so that we didn't have a repeat of previous years. And we've also launched the culture change workshop. So lots of activity. I think the ask of Overview and Scrutiny today is that this is a considerable size organisation. We've got the first year programme. We've used an agile methodology, which is basically identify the issue, fix as we go, and then keep reviewing that to make sure that it remains fit for purpose. The strategy takes us beyond fix the basics. It's talking about raising the standards and being best in class and exemplar. And at the moment, we know that a lot of these services that we're interacting with are very much at fix the basics. Some pockets of excellence, absolutely. But there's a lot of activity that we need to improve quite quickly. The programme has got a commitment for 12 months. We will be looking at what we do for the next 3 to 5 years in order to make sure that we continue to drive up those standards. And we've sort of outlined a scope where customers and services are coming to us to say, we think we need help with improving our customer contact here. And there is a list of some of them: highways, waste, housing, adults, and the web content activity. So really, what we wanted to test today with Overview and Scrutiny, on the back of all the pre-work that we've done with Overview and Scrutiny, it's almost a steer to say, does it feel that we've got those areas right? Are there things that we, potentially need to look at earlier? So that's sort of the first question that I'd hold. And I'm not sure, Chair, whether you want to ask questions on that part or take questions on that part now before we cover complaints, or if you'd like me to continue cover complaints and then we can give time for questions at the end of this.
Benny, I think I would prefer you finish off your introduction, but I am looking at the clock. Please be aware that we are having to time limit items of the agenda, so I just leave you with that thought. Please be as quick as you can. Will
do. Apologies, Chair. Thank you. Okay, so for the complaints activity, again, all with support of overview and scrutiny colleagues, we had a number of recommendations which we've now implemented. Apologies, 1 second. My apologies. So we had a number of findings. And the findings, when we looked at a complaints review, was that we had far higher complaint volumes than compared to other local authorities of a similar size. Other large authorities like Manchester, Leeds, average between 0.04 and 1 complaint per 1,000. We were averaging at that point 1.2. And we had complaints in 3 different places, 3 different systems. And we know based on the volumes, we didn't have enough capacity and there was no clear process for citizens and members to follow. We had no vexatious complaints policy and no definition of what is a complaint and what is an inquiry. So we had a lot of work to do in terms of complaint handling, inquiry handling. We took a report to the leadership team and we sought investment of £1.2 million to help us create a single system, a new policy, very clear members protocol, and make sure there was a single point for recording, which we needed an additional 29 FTE to resource. That was at a cost of £1.2 million. We couldn't have anticipated the increase in the volume of complaints that we now have as a result of better transparency. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily getting worse, but what it does mean is for the first time we've got more accurate visibility over the volume of complaints that we get through. So we saw almost a 50% increase in the volumes from when we mapped it originally to when we pressed the button and had a year's worth of data. We know that as a result of the new process, there has been a reduction in escalated complaints to stage 2. And we know that we've seen at least a 10% reduction in the number of complaints escalated to the Ombudsman. And we also know that we're getting an increase in number of members' inquiries. So the first full year we saw over 11,000 directed through that single channel. We know that the volumes are continuing to increase, and we now use that data to actually feed into service areas so that there is a service improvement plan wrapped around some of the activity through root cause analysis so that we can start to drive those improvements. And in the report, you'll see examples for city operations around miscollections, where we've done some cross-directorate work in Ladywood, but also for housing specifically, where we can directly link intervention from the complaints process through analysing activity, driving improvements around housing applications, and we've seen a reduction of 344 complaints in that quarter, with a downward trend in that area as a result of the intervention from the complaints work. So we know that if you learn from complaints, you will have a positive impact in the reduction of complaints that come through, but we do need all directorates and all services signed up and on board with making sure that we can do that. So the next steps for this are, we want to launch the member complaints inquiry dashboard. So we've got those ready to go, and we've got some training set up for the end of September and October. Continue the service improvement activity and learn from the Ombudsman, and build that case for, we haven't seen the reduction over the year in the volume of complaints as a result of service improvement to the level we would expect. So we do need to look at whether we need to extend the 29 staff for a further year or 2 years to allow the services opportunity to drive that service improvement activity. But there have been some positive steps in improvements in performance of complaint handling. But as everything, it's not perfect, and we do need to continue the focus to make sure that we maintain those improved service levels. Thank you. That's as quickly as I think I can summarise that for you. If there's any questions there.
I'm sure there are going to be questions and comments, Wendy. Can I ask members if we could sort of split this into two? I think the paper has two parts. One is the complaints issues, and the other is the customer service programme and going forward on that. And if I could maybe reverse this a little and take stuff on complaints to begin with. I looked at those numbers and I was horrified by them. And I think all members probably were also horrified. So if I could just take comments around or questions around the complaints part of the paper, and then we'll quickly move on to the customer services programme. I've got Alex and I've got Ewan and Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, there's 3 points I just want to make, Wendy. First, thank you. Very comprehensive report. It's very clearly articulated, and as the Chair said, very clearly presented as well. So thank you very much for the obvious time and effort that you put in. 3 points. I just want to draw perhaps your attention to the core council values that we have on the bottom of our emails, which says around putting citizens first, true to our word, acting courageously, and achieving excellence. So I just want to see that reference a little bit more in terms of where we are with staff, perhaps that can be embedded a little bit more in terms of procedures. The second one is in terms of council tax and small changes which will perhaps help residents really get to grips and not have to go through the whole bureaucratic system, which I think small changes which I haven't quite seen in the customer service journey. Forgive me if I've missed it, but it's the council tax reference that strongly. And the third one is just to be mindful that there are lots of residents who still struggle to use technology, mobile phones, websites, etc. 3 examples, the recent car park changes that have been reintroduced in car parks, even the Sutton Coldfield Town Hall, where the vaccination centre is, volunteers and people who are getting the vaccinations that have to pay for the charges now. I know this is something that we're calling in, but on that, there are some elderly residents who have been unable to use the application to pay for the charges and miss their appointments. In addition to that, I've had residents who have been able to apply for blue badges. They can't get a physical form posted out because they can't use the phone or the website. And thirdly, assisted collections, which for 4th time now still can't get an assisted collection done properly. Either the recycling's done, but the residual one isn't. So just some points just to be mindful in terms of the complaints. Thank you.
Perhaps, Wendy, we could take at least a couple of members together and then allow you to comment. I think it was Ewan next.
Thanks very much, Albert. I think, you know, from as this has been going through the journey of the committee, I had issues with the customer complaints being set up the way that it was. The councillors had to go to a third-party body rather than being able to speak directly to the officers to try and solve it. And I was a bit worried that a lot of money would be put into setting something up, taking cash away from actually what's supposed to be at the end headline resource that was supposed to be doing. And I think I can see a lot of data's being got out of this. I can see that dashboards and things are being referred to have been set up, but I don't see how much end improvement there's being got out of the money that's being thrown at this here. Just to use an example that puts this into perspective, I had a very complicated piece of casework I came in on the 20th of July. It was involved housing, adult social care, and SANAR. It was one where, you know, I had to go to a number of people. So I actually sent it to Deborah Cadman because I was very concerned about the children involved, the adults themselves, and the support that they weren't getting from the council ultimately. Deborah thought that was, you know, agreed with me and handed that off to the complaints team to look into. So I said that was on the 20th of July. I got a reply on the 4th of August, bearing in mind this is urgent, say that I wasn't happy with. So I went back to say, could you actually have a look at what I've said? And then on the 21st of September, I got a reply that said, I'm very sorry for the delay in responding to your query. Unfortunately, we've had a high volume of queries and complaints, which has led to a delayed response, and I can only apologise for the inconvenience. Now, if you think what we're here to do and how this family I was concerned about, that's what, 7 weeks that they're acknowledging. And if you add on the 2 weeks beforehand, that's 9 weeks. I would never have waited 9 weeks if this was me talking directly to officers. And so I'm glad that Wendy's taking on board, you know, the problems that are here, but I'm not quite sure if what we're doing so far has solved problems or almost made them potentially worse. But I'm, as you say, I'm not blaming Wendy for this, if you know what I'm trying to say, because she's arriving here, and I don't want to say I'm shooting the messenger, but I just think the overall system, I'm not sure at this stage we're seeing benefits for the residents that we're here supposed to be looking after at this stage anyway.
Wendy? Over to you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Yip, I think if I can cover those questions first, I think the core values, you're absolutely right. That's exactly, you know, the culture training that we're talking about, that we're launching as part of the programme, is to go back out and remind everybody almost why we're here, and what does good look like, and giving them examples of what actually bad looks like as well, so that we do stick to those values. Because you're right, the strapline is citizens at the heart of everything that we do, and the way that we're providing some of those services at the moment, you wouldn't think that we'd even got sight of the citizens. So we absolutely do need to make sure that we reinforce those messages. The council tax changes, and I think the bureaucracy and the processes, that's the whole purpose of the programme almost, is to say, look, don't just look at how we handle a call or how we handle an email or how we deal with a transaction, but look at the end-to-end piece. And so the business analyst team that are wrapped around this are trying to do exactly that, so that we fix the whole thing end to end, not just one part of a broken system, fix the whole lot. I think your channel issue is, you're absolutely right. You know, technology will not be for everybody, but equally picking up the phone, not everybody wants to pick up the phone after a hard day's work and speak to somebody. They just want to go online and transact. And so this is about not saying it should be that channel or that channel, but it should be saying across all of our services, citizens should have access through their channel of choice. And at the moment, some people don't answer the phones in those services. Some of those services are not available online, and some of the services are not available face to face. And it's about finding the right solution for a range of services, but it shouldn't be about restricting them and saying we're going to go online only or we're going to have face to face only. We should be able to provide that range of services through the channel of choice to suit our customers. So it's a really important point. Thank you for raising that. And Councillor Mackie, I think, you know, firstly, what I would say is that if when we were looking at this originally, you're absolutely right, as part of you know, the overview and scrutiny work, we couldn't even get to a number of the volume of complaints, because depending on who you ask, they give you a different number from a different system. So we had no visibility really over the true failure that was happening across the organisation, and probably more importantly, what we were doing about it. So, you know, I don't profess to sit here and say that as a result of the new process, everything's perfect. But what I can demonstrate is that, you know, compared to where we were when we started, we had around 30–40% of complaints were answered within the 10 days and member inquiries within 15. We're now operating at 80% of those complaints are handled within that time. So we're not at 90, which is where the target is, but we're certainly 50% better than we were a year ago. And that's in the context of having 50% more throughput coming through than we anticipated, because we expected at least a 10% increase and we've ended up with a 50% increase. But I absolutely take the point. And one of the things that we have to do better, and we haven't cracked this yet, is where we've got cross-directorate, multidisciplinary complaints that come in, you know, we need a single lead to own that. And I don't think we've nailed that yet as part of the teams, but I just want to put a bit of reassurance around the complaints teams that have gone in are working within those directorates. If I think about city operations, the complaints staff work in the depots alongside business support, alongside the service managers. So as something comes in, they're on site, they can go and speak to people about why something's been missed, whether it's an assisted collection or you know, a general bin inquiry. And we need to do more of that. As we've launched this in the lockdown period. That hasn't helped with that co-location. But for those services that were open, we do need to make sure that we continue to do that. But I absolutely take the point. And are we getting the value from the investment that we need in terms of improvement? I suppose my view on that is that with visibility, you can put together a suite of recommendations for improvement, but we cannot, as a complaints team, fix the whole council. We can make the visibility, we can show and call out where things aren't working, but we are absolutely dependent on service areas to work collectively with us to help fix some of these longer term issues. And I am seeing glimmers of hope in terms of some ownership at that level, because the data doesn't lie. And so by having an accurate data set, you can help influence and shape and prioritise almost for the services where that improvement needs to be. So I think it's moved a long way from where it was. I don't think it's perfect. I think we are getting value. I don't really want to be here in another year's time saying I need to keep that £1 million for the extra staff to process complaints, because actually the focus should be, I want to see the volumes reducing. And the only way we're going to do that is by driving up that quality. And we know today 65% of the complaints that we get are as a result of service quality or service failure.
Wendy, I'm going to have to break in because I am conscious of the time. Look, I think Ewan Mackey's comments are a reflection of what many members would probably have. And I think we have to differentiate between the run-of-the-mill type complaint which comes in and the very urgent, perhaps cross-directorate complaint that sometimes we have to deal with. And I think all Ewan is suggesting is that there are some, from time to time, and it is only from time to time, there are complaints that need to be handled with greater urgency than they are. And just to say that I took up one just about 3 weeks ago, similarly urgent, and I went straight to a chief officer because it had to be dealt with. It was a real embarrassment for the city council, or potentially a real embarrassment. Now, I know that when I'm doing that, the system, I think, actually at a chief officer level, puts the information into the system so that matter is recorded. But because I've got a chief officer in behind it, I got a quicker turnaround time than I would have otherwise got had I gone through the normal process. And I think Ewan's simply trying to bring that to your attention, that from a member perspective, there is from time to time the need to act with greater urgency, and there is also the need to be providing the member with a more regular, informative view as to what's happening with that urgent complaint. I'll leave it at that. You've heard both Ewan and myself, and I need to go on perhaps to other members. I've got Roger and then Deirdre and Shaman. I'll take all three and come back to you. But it is now nearing 3:30, and that's the time limit we've given for this item.
Okay, I will try to be brief. I think the important thing I want to say is that in terms of how we as an organisation handle complaints, what we're talking about here is trying to bring through culture change. This isn't a process that has gone wrong. This is a culture in the organisation that has gone wrong, and it cuts across many departments, not all, but many departments. And therefore, I think the statement in 8.6, where it says there is a risk full outcomes will not be achieved within the projected 2-year period, is there isn't a risk, there is certainty. And I think we really need to look at this. I would estimate something as a 5-year programme if we're really going to get on top of it. Because clearly, from the figures in this report, we are uncovering the extent of the level of complaints, but we don't seem to have reached the peak yet. And the first step, in recovering from any problem is actually fully acknowledging the level of the problem. I don't see anything in this report that actually indicates that while we are clearly making a lot of progress in this work, it's absolutely crucial, and I congratulate you on the progress you've made so far, but there's no confidence yet that we've actually fully got to the level of the problem. And indeed, in a lot of anecdotal
reports residents get to me, say to me, says, I don't bother complaining anymore because it's not going to make any difference. So there is clearly a huge amount of unmet demand there that we need to keep working at it, and we need to. I think, as I say, I think this is a 5-year issue, not a 2-year one. In specifically your question about are we looking at the right things? There's one thing that there's two things that have not been mentioned. I mean, the whole issue about assisted collections still seems to be just as bad. There seems to be no improvement there, and I don't understand why. And in some of the processes there, you put a complaint in and you get a reply, we'll let you know in 2 weeks. Well, what's that about? I mean, the next week, you're either going to sort it out the next week or you're not. So there seems to be no tailoring of the system to that specific issue. But in terms of the ones that I don't see much mention in your report, I have got a lot of problems in terms of antisocial behaviour, and I think there are major failings in the early intervention team. I think it's a strange process, and I'll be taking that up in housing and neighbourhoods, but having a sort of separate team to look at early interventions, I don't think it works. But leaving that to one side, there seems to be a desire within the way that part of the council operates is to try and sort of try and work as if we ignore the complaint, it'll go away. That seems to be the culture there, and that's causing a lot of problems because sometimes they do go away, but sometimes they escalate and get really nasty. And also, I've got a lot of issues in terms of planning enforcement. I've never known anything like it. It's like absolutely mushroomed in the last 2 or 3 years. There are problems that we can't resolve in terms of the slow nature of that process, but within that, there are a lot of things we can do in terms of keeping people informed about what is being done and what is realistic to happen. But basically, I'm having to do for the council rather than the council doing for residents. And I think that needs addressing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I've just got 2 points about waste management. The first is, I think if I phone anybody up, I want to be told the truth rather than being fobbed off, even if the truth isn't very palatable. So a quick example, bin day in Edgbaston is on a Monday. If someone left it till Thursday afternoon to tell me their recycling wasn't picked up or something, I would say to them, you've left it too late now. If you tell me immediately, I can get them to go back. But now we're almost at the next one. So wait till the next one and see if that's collected. But obviously, if it's recycling, it'll be green the next week, and they're not likely to come back and do recycling anyway. So do they ever say that to people? That the important thing is you must tell us immediately if your bin is left, because I find that the depot will go back if it's in the next day or two. But by the end of the week, it's hopeless. And rather than, I get the impression at the call centre, they just press a button. Yes, it'll be done in 3 working days, job done, job closed. And it won't be. So I'd rather that people were told, please tell us immediately. The other thing is the age-old problem with waste management has always been that you phone the call centre, you say your bin was missed, they send off an email to the depot and nothing happens. So what influence have you had in making sure the depot gets those emails and puts them at the top of their list? Because I get the impression they are left at the bottom of the list, and if there's not enough time, they just never get done. That's the important. Then you wouldn't have all these complaints if the depot were dealing with what you send them.
Thank you, Chair. When I have the same concern like my colleagues, the residents, when they phone through, either they can't get through, give up, or if they get through, they don't want to get definitely lost. Or they end up coming to me. They say, could you deal with it? So we are only trying to massage the problems rather than getting to the bottom of the cause of problems. That's where we need to be. Then we should be working at, I mean, what we know, get why we have so many mistakes. There's staff shortages, staff issues, right? By improving our complaint handling system does not answer the root cause of the problems. So that applies across all departments. So we need to tackle where the department failures are and try to resolve them. Then we have less complaints. Thank you.
Wendy, if you could be as brief as possible, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I will absolutely do my best. I think Councillor Harmer's point about culture change is absolutely right. This is a collective organisational issue and it needs collective organisational effort in order to resolve it. I've noted the areas for including assisted collections, early intervention and plan enforcement, so I will revisit that with the team. And Councillor Oldham, you're absolutely right about just tell us the truth. I mean, what we are working with the department on in waste services is trying to encourage a process where if the roads are dropped or if they're missed, we load them into the website so customers can have a look and see, but with a principle that, you know, you shouldn't need to pick the phone up and tell us, because as a resident, you should be assured that if we miss your bin today, within 48 hours, we will be back out to collect. And that's what we're trying to get underway in terms of a principle or a way of working with the department so that we can, you know, reduce the volume of calls coming in, but also complaints, but also give citizens an assurance that if we don't pick up today, we will pick up tomorrow or the next day, so that people feel confident in that. That will take time to embed, but the service is, you know, signed up and committed to help try and achieve that. And I think, was it Councillor Acklock? I couldn't see who it was that was talking last, so apologies. Thank you. Was around the issues underneath it, and you're absolutely right, and the data and insight that we gather from the complaint handling will help us get to the root cause of those issues, and we need to start making sure that we learn from that and we resolve. So all really valid points, and thank you for your input and contribution. And I think maybe as a separate note, if we you know, mindful of time today, we just do you know, a round robin and test that year 2 programme, and the priority list really is where it needs to be. We think we've captured it correctly, but you know, it would be good just to validate that really offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. There are a couple of matters that I want to raise myself. I think within the report there are 1 or 2 things that individual overview and scrutiny committees need to look at, perhaps. For example, on the Housing and Neighbourhoods Overview and Scrutiny Committee, the issue of the backlog on housing applications. The report clearly shows how Wendy's team's intervention was a good one and a successful one, but there is still a backlog there, and the ONS committee might want to look again at that issue. There are 1 or 2 other things where it might be appropriate for one of the other ONS committees to look again at the issue, to take matters forward. And I think I would encourage that to happen, and that can be done through the Scrutiny Office and individual chairs of ONS committees. The other thing is, I'm concerned that we press upon the deputy leader. My view, I don't know whether it's the committee view, but we should press on the deputy leader the need to bring forward an update on the funding availability for this programme. It would be absolutely crazy if we put in a 1-year programme at the cost of 1.6 million and then we didn't follow through. It would be absolutely crazy if we dismantled a team on the complaint side when we're just about starting to get a successful action on that. And I think we need to impress on the deputy leader that these programmes need to be continued, and there needs to be some assurances that the programmes will continue and there will be the appropriate funding behind them. So I'd like the committee to at least agree on that course of action. And if we record that, then officers will duly communicate with the deputy leader that that was the view of the committee. I'm looking for nods. I think I'm getting nods all around on that one. And the final one I would like to raise is that I'd like to propose that a small group, and I will say one from each of the, one from the Lib Dems, one from the Conservative members, and perhaps myself and maybe the deputy chair of the committee, meet with Wendy and take forward a number of actions, if you like, or a number of conversations to try and deal with some of the issues that perhaps have come up in the course of the discussion this afternoon. I think there's a member perspective here, Wendy, which needs to be ingrained into the programme. And I think therefore we could help you taking this programme forward, so long as we can persuade the deputy leader that the funding should be put behind it. So I would like to suggest there is a small group of members. I'm not looking for a resource from the Scrutiny office. I'm looking for a resource coming from your own team, Wendy, to take some work forward, which will assist you, I would hope, in getting further value out of the programme.
That's much appreciated, thank you.
And one from the Conservative side, if later you want to tell me, and myself, and would Labour members be happy, myself and the Deputy Chair? Okay. Oh, Ewan, have you volunteered?
Yeah.
There you are. Okay. Myself, Councillor Kerry Jenkins, Councillor Ewan Mackey, and Councillor Roger Harmer. Okay.
Sorry, just to be clear, are you looking to bring something back as a group to the next meeting, or do you want to meet first and then?
I will want to meet with Wendy and see what the range of issues are. And if we can bring something back to the October meeting, we'll endeavour to do so. But I know how tight that is going to be as a schedule because of the need to provide 7 days notice and all the rest of it. So it may not reach October, but that will be dependent. And that's why I'm saying we need a small team, and it has to be an intensive bit of work. Okay. Let's move on the agenda, please. I'm 10 minutes behind schedule. Therefore, I will try and exercise a bit more pressure on future items. We want to move on to Everyone's Battle, Everyone's Business Action Plan. And we've got a report from Richard Brooks, who's the Director of Strategy, Quality and Partnership on the action plan. Richard's on screen. I think I can just about make out from my distance from the screen. Richard, would you like? I'm going to keep repeating this point because that screen needs to be enlarged and significantly enlarged. Richard.
Councillor Moore, I sympathise. Is Councillor Cotton in the room? I can't.
No, he's not, and he's unable. He was unable to be here, Richard.
Okay, shall I give the introduction then to this item, and I'll keep it as brief as I can.
As quickly as you can, yeah.
Very good. Members, this item is reporting on a pack of documents and decisions that went to the previous cabinet report. And there were three items that were taken there. The first and most important, I think, was a revised and refreshed action plan for everybody's battle, everyone's business for the current financial year. The second was a review of workforce race equality, and that significantly informed the action plan that you're looking at. And the third element was a review of the action plan from the previous year. I just want to draw attention to a few items in this, which I think are very important. The first is that there is a particular focus in this year's Everyone's Battle, Everyone's Business Action Plan on our own workforce. And there's a significant set of new actions in the action plan that is intended to improve equity in our own workforce. And I just want to show you one thing on screen to demonstrate why this is so important. We've based the action plan on the evidence of what we see within our own organisation. What I'm showing you, which is in the agenda pack at page 186, is a chart that shows representation over time by grade across the council. So from left to right, you have grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to the J&C officer grades at the far right hand side. The red sort of maroon columns in that chart show the proportion of our workforce who are Black, Asian or from minority ethnic groups by grade. And the critical point that this highlights is that actually there is broadly proportionate representation of those groups between grade 1 to grade 5, but then a very significant drop in representation at grade 6, 7 and J&C officer grades. And The reason that's important is because this is consistent with the message that we hear from our staff. So as part of the development of our action plan, we engaged with the staff networks, with the Corporate Black Workers Support Group, with the Asian and Allies network, with a number of different staff groups, including the Black Managers Group in adult social care. And we heard a really clear message from them, which was that they were concerned about fairness in promotion, fairness in access to development opportunities, the representativeness of senior leadership and management, and fair treatment at work. And their concerns are justified, and they're justified by the data. And that's why the action plan, and in particular the fifth element of the action plan, which focuses on the workforce, has been so significantly strengthened. I won't try to go in detail through the actions, but I will just draw your attention to under the fifth section of that action plan, a series of positive action measures. And positive action, of course, does not mean positive discrimination. It means that based on the evidence that's available to us, we want to take steps, particularly through the human resources function, to address the inequities that we see in front of us. And that includes publishing more information at the directorate level about representativeness by grade, developing some inclusive leaders and emerging leaders programs of work, strengthening development and career progression opportunities and the awareness of those across the organisation, taking action on shortlisting and panels to ensure that they are diverse and that information is reported. And the intention, of course, of all of these is to improve the diversity of our recruitment and therefore to improve trust amongst our workforce and our ability to lead a diverse city. So I will stop there. I can answer hopefully any questions that you wish to raise, but I hope that is useful as an explanation of why there's this particular focus in the action plan, and to highlight some of the steps that we have committed to undertaking to address those issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to bring members in as quickly as I can. Alex, you were first, followed by Roger, followed by Ewan.
Thank you, Chair. Richard, there's 3 points I want to make. And first, thank you very much for the, again, procedural report. I just want to point out, firstly, on page 218, point 3.3, the work that you intend to do with Operation Black Vote. So I do want to give a hat tip to OBV, especially Lord Simon Woolley. Councillor Wasim Zafar Shan, graduates of OBV. So I'd like to see if we can be involved in the delivery of that programme. I know that it is red rag rated. Secondly, in terms of how the Cabinet reports, in terms of how we're trying to make sure that this is definitely everybody's battle, everyone's business. I had a conversation with Councillor Cotton on this. Unfortunately, it's frustrating that he's not here today. But we did have a conversation on how Cabinet reports have quality impact assessments attached to their reports. I'd like to see how we can get a similar equality impact report attached to, for example, either Cabinet reports or Scrutiny reports. And I think we came to some general consensus that it would be useful to have that involved within equalities impacted in terms of having some sort of assessment within the Scrutiny reports that get delivered. I was looking at seeing him for confirmation today and asked you to follow up on that. We agreed that it would be very helpful just to try and track that, especially in scrutinies, and perhaps towards the end of the municipal year, ask scrutiny chairs to come back and then sort of promote those to see genuinely how everyone's battle, everyone's business has actually been delivered genuinely so. And then the third one is just in terms of there's a budget of £650,000, which I understand has been put aside to enable qualities. I'd like to put a consideration of whether this can be diverted towards helping scrutiny staff or getting extra scrutiny staff to again focus on this to enable this to happen in line with the 5 strategic outcomes, because it is quite a hefty piece of business. And I think scrutiny are somewhat overwhelmed at the moment, and we discussed this at our previous meeting. Thank you, Richard.
Roger, I'll take all 3 members first, Richard. Roger.
So I wanted my question. I wanted to address the issue of the lack of, or the lower level of diversity at more senior levels of management, and I would be interested in your thoughts about is at junior levels, within the council, it is obviously very likely that people recruited by the council will be people from Birmingham, and will therefore, hopefully, if we get things right, reflect the diversity of Birmingham. At very senior levels, and if you're in JNC interviewing, it's the pool that we're recruiting from tends to be much more national, and therefore there's likely to be a factor that the diversity will reflect the diversity of the nation rather than the diversity of Birmingham, which is quite different. How much of that, of the difference that we see, do you think, or do you agree that that's part of the issue there? And if so, how much of that factor is it, or are there things beyond that? And then where does that lead us in terms of actually how we address that? I mean, the obvious one is in terms of doing more to develop and promote and train up staff within the organisation. That seems to be the obvious way that you tackle that. But just could you sort of expand a bit on that? Thanks.
Richard, I'll bring you in now because I've now got another member indicating. So if you take Councillor Yip and Councillor Harmer's comments and questions to begin with, I'll move on then to Deirdre Alden and Simon Sullivan. Oh, sorry, it was Ewan. Beg your pardon, Ewan Mackey. Richard, take those first two.
Thank you, Chair. So can I take the points on Operation Black Vote and the budgetary issue that Councillor Yip raised, note them and come back with something further on that, because I think I need to consult with people on those issues. Particularly on Operation Black Vote, that sounds absolutely right, and it should be reflected in our current programme of activity. On equality impact assessments, I think there is a role for audit here, actually. So I think we could deploy some of our audit function to look across the piece at the use and effectiveness of equality impact assessments. So I absolutely agree there is an issue here about whether they are being deployed consistently, whether they are having the intended impact. On Councillor Harmer's points, there is clearly a difference between the local versus the national level of Black, Asian and minority ethnic population. So in Birmingham, it's the last census, it was 42%. Nationally, that's something like, from my memory of the statistics, it's something like, at that time, I think 12.5%. So it's very significantly lower. I think 2 points in response. Yes, it's right, we're trying to draw from a broader pool when we're recruiting at the most senior level. However, I think we can do more to, and we are now doing more actually, to ensure the diversity of both the interview panels and the shortlists for these processes. And actually, I think it's incumbent on us to just go the extra mile to make sure that we really have tested the market fully and properly. That does not mean that it's always possible to appoint someone from one of those communities, but I think it's incumbent on us to ensure that we go for diverse shortlists and panels, that we measure that we use our best efforts to ensure diversity at those stages of the process. And I noticed that my colleague Darren Hockaday has joined us, so he may wish to comment on those issues as well. But I think your point about growing our own is crucial as well, Councillor Harmer. I've just gone through significant recruitment in my area, which is strategy policy, strategy partnership and equality, and into the new Insight team. I've essentially recruited a completely balanced group of people. So it's 50-50 men, women, 50-50 white versus non-white intake, and a lot of those people are coming out of institutions in Birmingham, including our excellent higher education institutions. I want to see those people grow through the organisation. So I think both of those two things have an impact on JNC level recruitment.
I'm happy to add, Richard, if I may.
Sure.
It's just to Councillor Harmer's point. I think absolutely, in theory, you'd expect that if you were, say, fishing and hiring from Birmingham, that the odds would be perhaps stacked in the favour of diversity. I mean, personally, I've just recruited a new team of people partners, and I'm pleased to say half of those are of BME ethnic minority backgrounds, and only one of them is actually from from Birmingham. I think the point I would add to diversity when recruiting for some J&C roles externally is that for certain professions there is a limited pool from BAME backgrounds, and actually by expanding your range in terms of location, it can enable you to make sure that you've got a positive shortlist, or a shortlist that involves BAME candidates. So I think it doesn't quite simply work as if you just hire from Birmingham that you are guaranteed, or you are assured of those candidates. So I think recruiting nationally can work in our favour around diversity as well. So I just wanted to add that. And in terms of growing people internally, the work that I've committed to with my team will ensure that we've identified and managed talent through succession planning and targeted career development of those at 5, 6 and 7, so that we've got more internally to move up to J&C. Thank you.
Thanks. Ewan?
Thank you very much. First of all, really supportive of the body of work here and the direction that it wants to go. Fully support it. Sorry, apologies to Richard slightly, because the point I'm going to make is the point that I made when I came to Cabinet, but I still think it's a valid point, so I'll make it here, is that because we've got, when we're looking at ethnicity, we've got 16% of the workforce that we don't know their ethnicity. If you wanted to be really awkward, you could argue that even the white members of the staff are underrepresented, because there's that big 16%. So we're only saying 48% of the workforce is white of what we know. And so I think we've got to be very careful when we're drilling down into some of this data and when we're using hard, fast percentages. There's still, for me, too big a number that we don't know the ethnicity of everyone who's working in the organisation. So I would just really saying I would like over time to see that number coming down. I don't know why we don't know. Is it because people don't feel comfortable to say, or we haven't asked them the question? But I just feel that if we're going to be looking this heavily at the numbers, we just need to get the unknowns less than they are at the minute. That's 16% of our workforce is still a big number. Thank you very much, Albert.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Richard, so I'm going to speak from sort of my sort of personal experience of working in a public service sector, not for the council. But as an Asian employee, the sort of issues that I've experienced, and which I know many other people of sort of my age have, or who identify as BAME have experienced, is that you can be just as qualified as your colleague. And be passed for promotion many times, nothing to do with the, that you're not capable or, suitable for the job. And these are the kind of issues, it's the equality in opportunities that you face in organizations. And I think that can be a cultural issue. Obviously, in this case, it's good to see that, we're doing something about this. But I think we shouldn't make the assumption that, the reason why we haven't got as many sort of BAME people represented in senior roles is because of their capabilities, or that we don't have people who live in Birmingham who are not qualified to do these roles, because, I am sure that we do have, and I think we just need to be more persistent and committed towards achieving a fair representation across all roles. Thank you.
Comments, Richard?
Thanks, Chair. On Councillor Mackey's point about disclosure, we have increased the level of disclosure amongst our workforce quite significantly over the past years. That's one of the successes, I think. You're quite right, Councillor, that 16% unknown is still too many, and we're working hard to reduce that number. Darren may want to say something on that as well. I think we have enough data here to draw conclusions with a reasonable degree of confidence, but as we get down to sort of looking at cross-cuts of the data, where we're looking at race and gender and other issues in an intersectional way, that's when it becomes less less reliable. But we are definitely focused on increasing levels of confidence to give disclosure, and work has been ongoing on that over just the very recent months. On Councillor Silliman's point about capability and recognition, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I've joined, as colleagues have, and I know Councillor Cotton has as well, because I've been in these spaces with him. I joined listening circles with our Black and Asian staff colleagues, and I've heard people's experiences. I'm a white man. I experience the opposite of this. I experience privilege, and I've tried to listen to the experiences of our colleagues who are on the other end of small aggressions, being passed over, being ignored in meetings, not being given the credit for their for their good ideas and their hard work. I think it's really important that we do everything we can as leaders of the organisation to listen to those and respond to those experiences. And I just couldn't agree more that it's not fundamentally a question of the lack of ability or the lack of rich talent for us to recruit and promote. Absolutely agree.
Thank you, Richard. I've got a number of almost questions for you, if you wouldn't mind. Oh, sorry. Did you want to bring your colleague in on that one of those aspects?
Just on the disclosures, to add to what Richard's already said, we have been working far more closely with the networks and the trade unions in the run-up to launching the refresh of all the data collection. So I think there's a great deal more confidence of working together that we'll get a good response.
Okay, Richard, a number of questions. I'll give you them one by one, and they can be quite quickly answered, I think. Are there any actions from the 21-22 action plan that were not completed and have not been incorporated into the 22-23 plan?
I think there probably are, because we've had to make a judgment about how to make the plan manageable and what to prioritise. Would you like me to write to you with an account of what actions those are and why we've chosen not to include them?
Absolutely, and I will ensure that all members receive your response, Richard. My second point is that in section 1.2 of the action plan, there is reference to the development of city indicators. Now, we've been on this one before as ONS coordinating committee, and it's about the timescale of that work and therefore when it might come forward to coordinating ONS.
So we plan to launch a city observatory next month, and I was looking at our cut of the city indicators yesterday. So we have done the work ready to make these visible. I will be ready to come and present to you. Well, if it must be no later than in a month's time at this point.
Thank you for that. My third point is around section 5.11 of the action plan about producing and publishing a directorate level diversity and inclusion dashboard, etc. I think that's a piece of work that Resources ONS might well pick up on in consideration of the committee's work programme after publication in February 23. So I'm just alerting you to something that may well sit with another ONS committee at the appropriate time. My fourth point is about the action plan references to the Armed Forces Partnership. Is that a forum that's preparing for the new statutory duty following the Armed Forces Act?
I'm very sorry, I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know the link between the two things. So
you'll come back on that one as well?
Yeah.
Okay, and my final point is really a little bit of a comment. It's section 2.10 of the action plan, and that identifies work on tackling period poverty and reducing period stigma. Members, I don't know whether, or you may have been there yourself, Richard, but members might like to know there is a link between those issues set out in 2.10 of the action plan and a discussion at the Health and Overview Scrutiny Committee yesterday. There was information that a workshop in one school found that 40% of young women who attended had at one point stayed off school during their period. So I think this is a big issue and something that you're right to make reference to, and it perhaps should be, it would be appropriate if Health and Adult Care ONS Committee are to receive a monitoring report on the recommendations that are coming forward in that area, Richard.
Noted.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, Fiona's left.
I was just going to mention at the Health and Adult Care Committee, it was mentioned that there could potentially be a link with the education of children's social care because of the role of schools and the work that's been reported to that committee around inclusion, which could broadly cover this issue as well.
Certainly, and we'll find a way of trying to ensure that happens, Fiona. Richard has heard and noted it. Okay, thank you both for coming along, and I've managed to catch up on the timetable for this meeting. Thank you for your help and cooperation. Okay, that means we can move on to item 7, which is the cost of living crisis. Richard hasn't yet departed because I need him for this particular issue. Richard, would you perhaps introduce the report? I know you've got a slideshow, so could you introduce the report for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, this issue has moved very rapidly over the last weeks and months, and since the submission of the papers for the originally scheduled meeting, I think there have been important developments, including in our response. Would you permit me to present a slightly updated pack presenting?
I received it earlier today, and I would be happy to, because I went through the updated pack and compared it with the earlier one, and I think members ought to know what the updates are. So please use your updated plan.
Thank you very much.
We've got a screen problem, but other than that.
If I could just have to I will share the right.
He's got to wheel it towards us. Is the cable long enough?
Whilst you're doing that, Richard, Fiona is going to email the updated report to all members. So in a short space of time, it will also be on the computers of members.
We never used to have this problem, did we, Albert, when we used to have the camera in the middle and it just used to spin round?
Richard, please proceed.
Thank you. If colleagues have got laptops with them, if they join from their laptops, they'll be able to see it right on the screen right in front of them. So I'm going to present in sort of two halves here. The first half is about the context for the cost of living crisis in the city, some particular issues affecting Birmingham. The second goes into our developing response, for which I'm responsible as the senior responsible officer now. So the first half of this is more descriptive, and the second half is more about how we're developing our response and engaging our partners. And we shared some of this material with the city partners at City Board earlier today. So we're rapidly engaging across the city on these issues. The first thing to say is that poverty was already widespread at the beginning of the cost of living crisis as the prices have risen over the past several years. So in the UK, before COVID hit, approximately 1 in 6 people lived in absolute poverty. And that means poverty, not relative to other people, but relative to an absolute baseline. And amongst children, the rate is higher. So 1 in 4 children were living in poverty. One important thing to note is that amongst pensioners, the rate is lower. So 1 in 9 pensioners living in poverty before COVID. And we used to think 20 or 30 years ago of pensioners being particularly exposed to the risk of poverty. That is no longer the case relative to working age adults and children. So they are relatively less at risk now. Poverty rates in Birmingham are much higher. They're almost double the national rate for children. And whilst there are no regularly collected statistics, the modelled work on this indicates that over 40% of our children were living in poverty in 2019-20. That is over 100,000 children across the city. And whilst there are, again, not accurate estimates of overall poverty in Birmingham as a whole, it must affect well over 300,000 people, given the prevalence rates in our population. That's a very, very large scale problem. The prices are now, as everyone knows, rising exceptionally fast, faster than they have risen for nearly 40 years. Food and fuel have been disproportionately affected. And the key points that I want to draw attention to here are that's relatively well known, but it's our poorest households that spend the highest proportion of their income on precisely the goods that have been most affected by inflation. And food is the one which people are really feeling the pinch on because it's a regular daily outgoing, and the prices of basic foodstuffs have been particularly badly affected. So it's things like staple carbohydrates that have gone up, and cooking oils that have gone up in price particularly. The other point here is that this is not a passing issue. So inflation is likely to remain high and not fall back to normal levels on current forecasts until 2024. So it's expected to remain high all through 2023. And at the end of that period, whilst inflation, the rate of change may have come down, all of the cost increases have been baked in. So the prices still remain high, they're just not going up at the same rate. There's an exceptionally painful impact on real incomes. Nothing like this has been seen for 40 years, certainly. Energy prices are the single biggest driver now. And the key point that I want to make here is that even though the government has just capped household energy bills at £2,500, at a cost it's just revealed today of £60 billion this year, this financial year. It's a huge intervention. That is still not an absolute cap. That is a cap based on standing charges and unit costs. So actually, many households with larger energy use, and that includes some households with relatively low incomes, given they might be in relatively low quality but large dwellings with large households, will be significantly higher. These costs are more than double what they were last year, and that was a significant increase on the year before. Birmingham is particularly exposed to this crisis. So, as I said, over 300,000 people already in poverty. At least the same again will struggle to pay their bills. We have a very high underlying driver of poverty, which is unemployment and non-employment rate and low employment rates. So our unemployment in the city is 3 times the national average. Our youth unemployment is particularly high. We stand out amongst the core cities as having exceptionally high unemployment. And in the long term, that's the key driver. There's a big concentration of poverty in key ethnic groups which are heavily represented in the city, particularly Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage families. I'll come on to that a bit later. A point that is less well known is that the 2-child limit for child benefit, which was introduced by the coalition government some time ago, has started to have a progressive impact on our larger families. So this was a policy which limited benefits to essentially the first 2 children in large families, but it only applied to third and subsequent children who were born after April 2017. More and more families have third and subsequent children, which are not covered by benefit entitlement now. It's important that we identify those and support them. And obviously we have big issues of multiple disadvantage, from unemployment, from disability as a particular issue, from high levels of cost. One final point here to make is that we have very poor housing stock. In fact, the recent Friends of the Earth analysis suggests that we have amongst the poorest housing stock in the whole country. And that drives very high energy use, which drives high cost of energy. I mentioned Pakistani and Bangladeshi households. They're the highest groups suffering absolute low income after housing costs in particular. And they're disproportionately represented in the city. Now, a very important point to make is that actually disadvantage is broadly spread across Birmingham's wards. So this is a chart which I may have shown you before, which shows all 69 wards spread out from the least deprived at the left to the most deprived at the right. The red line, sorry, the black line across the middle is the England average. All of the wards below the line are more deprived than the England average. That's nearly 90% of our wards. And we have a very, very long tail of wards which are in the most deprived 10% and the most deprived 20%. So the average Birmingham ward is in the most 20% deprived for all English wards. It's a very broad spread of deprivation. But actually, deprivation is often concentrated below ward level. And as we develop our response to the crisis, I think it's important we map and address the micro-local issues here. So this is showing Druids Heath and Monihull, which actually, as a ward in Birmingham, on average, is not particularly deprived. But that's because it's got two halves. The Druids Heath half is acutely deprived compared to the northern half of that ward. Lack of employment, as I said, is the key factor driving poverty in Birmingham, and it's the workless households that are particularly likely to be in poverty. But it's hard to shift this quickly. So as we develop our response, I think it's important we phase it so that we have short-term actions, but then longer-term focus on getting more people into employment in order to create that flow of income into households. But it's hard to shift this winter. And just to make the point about unemployment in Birmingham, this is claimant count unemployment, so the hard definition of people who are claiming unemployment benefits. You can see the huge jump here in COVID, with Birmingham coming down, but not back down to pre-COVID levels, but much, much higher than the UK average. The UK rate at 3.7% is a third the rate of places like Ladywood, Hodge Hill, Perry Barr. I'll skip over this in order to say there's some actually no, the one point I'll make from this slide. Claimant rates for benefits are actually mean that we are missing, many people in Birmingham are missing out on claiming their entitlements. And whilst we've got over 150,000 people claiming universal credit, I estimate that we have tens of thousands of households not claiming their benefit entitlements. And that's missing out on huge amounts of income for the city and for those individuals. So that's a really important priority for us. It's particularly important that we focus on the big recurrent benefits, the benefits that pay out every month and at significant scale. We've invested huge amounts of time and effort providing residents with household support fund payments, one-off payments of £200. We've processed tens of thousands of these claims now. I've represented the size of that claim on the left of this chart as one of those red blocks. That's £200. On the right-hand side is the annual value of a new universal credit claim for a household with 2 adults and 2 children, very roughly £12,000. And it just gives you a sense of the scale of difference of the value of these two benefits. They're really important that we don't spend all of our time and effort giving one-off crisis payments when actually what we could be doing is increasing recurrent benefit take-up for our households. So some initial conclusions. First of all, it's a very large-scale issue, deep-rooted, widespread across the city, no quick fix. And our discretionary resources are small in comparison to the needs, so we have to be very efficient and focused where they make the biggest impact. Third key point, not widely appreciated, is that we have no statutory responsibilities in this area, in relation to poverty, for example, or cost of living. But we should consider if our organisational design is right for the challenge and we think respond appropriately to the pressing need. In the short term, increasing uptake of benefits is one of the few ways of making difference at scale. And in the medium term, it's that point about increasing employment levels. And that's not just unemployed people, but getting people who are not looking for work into work as well. So I've got just a few slides on organising our response. The first thing to say is we've thought about how do we think about this complex problem in manageable buckets. And the 4 headings here are an attempt to do that. People, public services and the voluntary and community sector, businesses and places. So under the people heading, the focus is on increasing income, reducing costs, and supporting people with access to the essentials of life like food and warmth. For the public sector and the voluntary sector, this is about collaborating, working with each other, rallying the sector and supporting organisations. And the city partnership is central to that. I mean, we had an excellent meeting earlier today involving senior representation from the NHS, the education sector, the voluntary sector, etc. Is a good meeting of city partnership. On the business side, the focus here is on protecting jobs and preventing bankruptcy. So many of our businesses are facing very high energy bills, which they will struggle to pay despite the cap in business costs, which is time limited, by the way. And on the places side, this is about increasing energy efficiency, both within our own estate, which is substantial, across the wider public sector and other large users of energy in the city to reduce overall energy demand, and increasing household energy efficiency through the provision of advice and also through the provision of support with energy efficiency measures. We have mapped our work at the moment against what we think the priorities are and where we could scale up our help. And we've been mindful of the fact that with winter approaching, temperature dropping, we've got to act very quickly at pace and with grip. We've identified 5 priority work streams, and these are 4 externally focused ones and 1 internally on our staff. And those 4 external work streams are, first of all, improving the availability of advice to residents with a focus on increasing benefit take-up. That means through our own services, which are dispersed across many different sort of parts of the council, and working with our contracted providers in the third sector. Secondly, increasing energy efficiency with a focus on reducing costs, as I've just mentioned, partly through the provision of advice, partly through direct action. Thirdly, on increasing the supply of food through food banks across the city. And I think the model here is likely to be the one that we engaged during COVID, where we used the third sector extensively to improve the supply of food to food banks. It's been alerted to me just today that we've got food banks which are facing problems keeping their freezers, for example, and their refrigerators running due to energy costs. That's something we will need to step into very quickly. The fourth area is ensuring the provision of a network of warm spaces across the city, starting with libraries, but building out into other public buildings and into other buildings. We've now got offers coming in, some from small organisations, some from private businesses, of support with this programme. If we're really successful, we can start to integrate some of these activities, so providing advice in warm spaces, potentially with access to food banks, for example, or energy efficiency advice. As quickly as we can, I want to get this up and running. And the fifth priority is about supporting our staff, where we've got many staff who are, despite being paid the living wage, in households where overall income is low and who may be facing significant cost of living pressures themselves. Everyone will face pressures. Many of our staff at household level will face significant pressures. We have announced an emergency, the leader of the council has announced an emergency. We've created a new programme that I'm describing to you now with a strategic group, which I will chair, to accelerate decision making and delivery. And I want to learn the lessons of COVID, which are the need to work across service boundaries, be agile, and frankly break down our service silos and drive change effectively. The fourth point here is to take a deep partnership approach at the strategic, tactical and operational level. And we will bring forward, the Cabinet member will bring forward proposals for a request for resources at the October 11th Cabinet to support this programme initially. I want to just close with a final slide on the structure of our response here. This is the current structure of our strategic response to the crisis. This has all been developed in the last couple of weeks, so this is working at pace. We've used our emergency planning procedures without activating the emergency powers. So there is no intention to move away from the normal processes of Cabinet and full council governance, oversight by the Scrutiny committee system, and the normal decision making and constitutional procedures. What we've instead done is created a cost of living strategic response group, which is the big red block in the middle of this this chart, which I will chair as SRO, which will have senior representation from corporate leadership team, plus some external representation from our city partners. And the grey box on the right hand side is a cost of living, this is not formed yet, a cost of living task force where we have senior external visible representation from the city partners. The red blocks across the middle of this slide are the sort of tactical cells, which I won't go into in detail, but which are the functions that sit across the programme. Comms and External Affairs, Intelligence and Insight, led by my team under Richard Smith, an Operational Coordination and Delivery Group led through the city operations, a Business Continuity Cell, and an External Partnership Group chaired by Justin Varney. And then underneath that, the priority work streams, which match the priorities I've just showed you. I set up a programme team to support this so that officers can efficiently draw together across the council the activity that they need to. And the partnership activity is really critical here. So this is partnership at the level of the task force. Sorry, I'm trying to. That's it. At the task force, membership on the strategic group, in the city partnership meeting, and we may extend that into a public partnership as well. So we've got the right public involvement and partner involvement in the priority work streams. So I know that's a lot of material. That's some additional material to absorb in addition to what was in the papers. So I apologise for the short notice of this, but as I say, Chair, this is very rapidly developing work, and I'm bringing it to you at the very earliest opportunity for engagement. So I will stop there and take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. I've got 2 members, 3 members, 4 members, starting with Ewan.
Thank you very much, Albert, and thanks very much for the report. It was superb. I was just interested when you were saying that you felt that not all the available levels of support for the government are being claimed in the area, and I think that probably is 100% true. I was just wondering if that figure was available, certainly for the days when I was in the North East, mainly because in the days it was known as the DHSS was based in Long Benton there. They could tell you exactly, or pretty much, what their fairly accurate assumption of what benefits weren't being claimed and how much money the economy with the North East was suffering because that money wasn't being claimed. I was just wondering if that figure was available for our area, so we could almost have some sort of drive to understand that people who are aware of what they can claim, because if it's there to be claimed and it's not being claimed, it's not helping anyone, is it really?
Take a couple more members first, Richard. Kerry?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Richard. That was a really comprehensive report and a lot of information there for us to take on board, and I'm sure we won't have questions on everything now because there's so much to it. But one thing that struck me was when the presentation was talking about the numbers of children living in poverty in comparison to the number of pensioners. So what, 1 in 4 to 1 in 9. And then with the last round of the household support fund being, it was decided that that would be targeted to pensioners to apply in the first instance. So I wondered where that decision came from, because clearly we have lots and lots of families across our wards that are really struggling. In terms of making information available and we must all get residents turning up at our advice surgeries or contacting us desperate and not knowing where to go to. So having all of that information to elected members so that we can properly signpost residents to where they can go for support that will best fit their needs, because clearly they will be quite different depending on what part of the city we're representing. So it'd be really good to have some sort of briefing for all elected members to really show us what's available and what the council's offering, and not just the council, because clearly there's support and advice and financial help from other parties as well. I think just lastly, I think one area that we're not talking about very much in all of the cost of living emergency is actually how we improve housing for our families, because families that are living in poor housing or in temporary accommodation or emergency accommodation, that's some of the worst housing possible, and that will impact on every single level of how they're experiencing cost of living. And it's how do we get, how do we improve our housing stock? How do we deliver housing with compassion? And how do we basically have a programme where we're really starting to build the number of social housing that this city really needs? We had Wendy earlier, and you were on part of that call, and some of that customer service was about from residents that have been trying to get their applications for the housing register, for months. But we know that there are 30,000 people already waiting. So there's a bit of that there. I'll stop there, Richard, because I know there'll be a lot more questions.
Can I just reinforce Kerry's first point, Richard? I brought this agenda item forward for this meeting because I thought that the council needed to reflect on these issues, and we need to go on, though, and ensure that every single member of the council is aware of perhaps what the issues are and what the response is. And we need then to go beyond that to ensure that the public as a whole, our residents, are fully aware of what perhaps the city and indeed the city council are trying to do. So I think it's imperative that we address the point that Kerry made.
Councillor Paul, would you like me to respond quickly to the other points being raised so far? They're great, they're fantastically good points. Councillor Mackie, on benefits take-up, that information is deliberately no longer available. So the government has stopped producing data on on the estimates of benefit take-up. It's like they've forbidden people from thinking about it, both at National Statistics and at DWP. So we have to estimate it. And the estimates that were available under the previous system were that approximately 20% nationally of income support was unclaimed. And we can look at the gap between universal credit claims and non-employment to get some sense of this as well. The value of these underclaims are enormous. So if we have 150,000 roughly people claiming on universal credit, and the number is 20%, that's 30,000 people. Every 1,000 people could be in the order of £10 million of additional resource into the city. So the numbers are enormous. So as part of this work, I want us to produce our own estimates of benefit take-up. That won't be immediate, but I think it's really important. The numbers are, but we're deliberately prevented from having that information at national level. On the household support fund payment, Councillor Jenkins, this is also absolutely enraging. So we have been forced by the Department for Work and Pensions to allocate blocks of the household support fund payments, and as you clearly know, we have exhausted the funds that are available for working age households, and we have not been able to spend some £2 million plus of the support that's available for pensioner households. We have written to them and requested flexibility to move the money, and I'm afraid the computer says no. So we've had the official departmental response to us. I think now this moves into the political realm of whether we can force a change at the political level. But it's enraging. We're just being told no, and the consequence of that will be that if we are not able to transfer the money from budget to budget, we'll have to start sending people post office vouchers who haven't asked for them. On the help, on the sort of advice surgeries, information for members and help pack, absolutely, we are onto it. I will make sure that there is both a briefing for members and a pack of resources available for members in this space. I'm meeting with the team that's responsible for this at 5 o'clock. And on the improvement of housing issue, clearly the state of the housing stock in Birmingham is a very, very big long-term issue, and I think there's a short, a medium, and a longer-term response to this. In the very short term, we might be able to help people reduce their heating bills by their behaviour, and also through some short-term, low-cost changes to their homes, like curtains and draft exclusions and closing, that sort of thing. in the medium term, some of the bigger adjustments that people can make to their houses are more expensive, but I've got the right person in the work stream, Ellie Horrocks-Smith, who's also responsible for the Net Zero programme, working on exactly that, but that's a bit longer term. The bigger issue about moving towards a net zero housing stock is a very long term, a multi-billion-pound challenge. But I'm really keen to use the crisis to accelerate progress.
Thanks. Mohammed Idris.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Richard. I'm going to ask you about the £600 that the families on pension credit, universal credit, income support, job seeking allowance and employment support allowance. These are the 5 categories of benefits that people are going to be paid that 600. But there are tens of thousands of pensioners who for some reason don't get pension credit, and there are tens of thousands of carers and people on PIPs and disability benefits. They are as much need of that £600. These are the eligible people are. So those people are going to miss, and they are struggling. So what is being done to support those people?
Kerry, you wanted to come back in?
Oh, I just wanted to, just go back to the household support fund to see whether or not Richard might have already started this, to do some sort of analysis on where that money has been delivered to, and whether it's being delivered to those people in Birmingham that we know really are in desperate need of financial support. Really to get an analysis, Richard, of where the money's gone.
2 further comments, and I'll pass it back to you, Richard. First, Roger Harmer.
So I think it's really important that we've got a very agile response to this, because there are going to be groups that perhaps aren't immediately obvious who are going to suffer. So there will be people who've maybe pushed themselves to buy a house in the last 2 or 3 years that was perhaps at the limits of what they could afford. If they've got fixed mortgages way into the future, that's going to be fine. But if either their fix is coming to the end or they're on a variable rate, their cost of housing could go up significantly. And if you overlay that with the energy and the food costs, there is a risk that they may be in severe trouble in terms of being able to stay in the house, and the impact that might have on our role as in terms of providing housing for people. And I think it's really important in terms of the strategy, because it's coming at us so quickly. I mean, we've got people on prepayment meters maybe struggling with the very, very first cold snap. They're simply not able to have enough money to put into the meter. We need that quick response. I think the really important way of delivering that is getting funding to the voluntary and community sector, because they're the people on the ground who, if you look at COVID, were able to respond really, really quickly and know people and know perhaps the vulnerable people that may not come forward quickly, but they know who they are. So it's really important that whatever strategy we do come up with, that the voluntary and community sector has a really important role to play in that. And I think, to a certain extent, it's just about making sure they've got the resources to do what they do. And finally, my point is, and I know we've had this conversation, there are resources out there made available by the government for insulating houses, putting in £10,000 worth of insulation, that the bureaucracy across the City Council and Civico, and I'm not sure where the problem lies, that we're simply not moving that programme forward quickly enough to have a chance of actually spending all that money. And I hope that you have picked that up and you're looking into what we can do to get that programme up and running as quickly as possible.
Roger, and finally, Simon Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard, for the report. Chair, I have a proposal. And what I propose is that the cost of living is looked at by every committee, because the impact is so vast and varied that we really need to look at this, I think, at a deeper level, whether it's unemployment, housing, health or education. I think, you know, the impact, I think we're just sort of seeing the beginning of it. So I think it's, you know, my suggestion is that, you know, that we look at this on each of the committees at a more deeper level. I mean, just quickly to make a point in terms of the housing, one of the issues that we've had as a result of the benefit cap is that you've got rent prices which have increased. But you know, what people are getting, if they're unfortunate enough to find themselves relying on benefit for rent, it just does not cover the cost. So you're seeing an increase in housing applications. I mean, there's like a £500 difference between what the rent is in certain, you know, I'd say inner city, more, you know, deprived wards. I mean, the amount that people are getting in benefit is like you're seeing almost like a £500-600 difference. And this is where we're going to see a strain on people, you know, applying for housing, and it's going to have a strain on that. And it's all like a sort of tripling, you know, sort of effect. So that's my proposal. I mean,
I'd suggest on that issue, Sima, that I discussed that with the screening office. There is, for example, I'll give you an example. I was thinking along somewhat the same lines, getting homes and neighbourhoods, for example, to look at where we're at in terms of the upgrading of homes to make them more fuel efficient, because as was said there, there's a program which has government funding, but perhaps we're not pulling down that program as fast as we should. So that would be very much an issue which a scrutiny committee could look at, and could look at quite quickly, and it would be helpful to Richard and his colleagues if there was information that came out of such a process. So I'll look at that with the scrutiny officers. There is one aspect of this which I think Resources ONS needs to look at, and that's, Richard, what the budget implications are for the City Council of this programme, of a cost of living crisis programme. Whether in fact there is some slack in the budget that would allow for funding of some measures, or whether there is no slack in the budget that would therefore stymie measures being brought forward. So I think that is certainly an issue that we ought to get Resources ONS Committee onto straight away. Richard, over to you.
Thank you. I mean, clearly this is a very big, complicated agenda, and the challenge that I think we've got is, well, we've got to have a programme of work that makes a difference to what we're doing, that changes what we're doing, without trying to draw absolutely everything that the council does into it, because otherwise it'll drown. I'm absolutely seized by Councillor Harmer's point about the cold snap and people on prepayment meters. I just think I'm hoping that the weather holds off for as long as possible, because that is, I think, the first real test of city resilience. People on prepayment meters can't spread out their payments. They're going to have to put cash into into their card. I'm really seized by that. If I may take Councillor Idris and Councillor Kerry's sort of point about and Councillor Harmer's point about flexibility together, I think that is absolutely right. We need to be really agile here, because it's really hard to tell which parts of the city will be most affected, which types of people will be particularly affected, where the most acute needs will pop up. And I just want to give you my commitment that we will seek to be as agile as possible and intelligence-led as possible. Part of what I want to do is map need versus provision. So we don't normally do this, but as part of the Ukraine response work, we have invested significant money in mapping exactly where our homes for Ukrainian families are and what services they're receiving. I want to take a similar approach with the provision of services against the need. And as I say, we've developed a financial resilience dashboard, which I could show you perhaps at the next Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting as part of that look at sort of city data. On Councillor Kerry's point about household support fund payments. So we do have an analysis of which groups of people payments have been made to, but those are quite broad categories. I don't know whether it is possible to analyse that data in more detail, for example, which types of people are claiming. I don't know at this point, but I can approach. It would be Tim Saville, I think, would be the officer who would be relevant there. What I know that we've done is we've essentially taken applications and paid for those applications where they meet the criteria. And we know that we've exhausted the funds before we've exhausted the number of people who have come forward to claim them. But I'll ask for the information that we have available, Councillor Kerry, to be made available to the committee. On the home efficiency measures, yes, Councillor Harmer, I've followed up our earlier conversation with the housing office, the relevant housing officer, and Ellie Horrocks-Smith in the Net Zero team. Ellie is now leading the energy efficiency work stream in this programme. So she has got the authority to lead that activity cross council now. She'll be bringing proposals to the strategic response group to accelerate the provision of energy efficiency measures. So we're alive to the issue. And just finally, Councillor Ball, returning to your point about the council financial impact, I think there are multiple impacts here. So there are impacts from the cost to the council of our services, which are quite significant. There's the costs of increasing and scaling up our response, where we've got some discretion, but where I think it is essential for us to increase our expenditure in some areas in order to increase our provision. But there's also loss of income. Some people will not be able to pay monies that are owed to the council, and it would be completely illogical for us to be making people destitute or homeless as a result of pursuing them for monies owed, when actually with the other hand, we're trying to support them financially through this crisis. So I think we'll have to accept some reduction in council income as a result of people's inability to pay. But we've got to be very careful to think through these issues and take proper policy decisions on them. The Strategic Director for City Management, Becky Hellard, our Section 151 officer, has agreed to sit on the Strategic Response Group. So there will be, very senior involvement on the resources side in relation to these issues. And that's an obvious point, isn't it, to come to the Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you for that, Richard. Deirdre, you wanted to come back?
Well, I was slightly alarmed by that comment at the end, because it sounded like a message is going out to everybody that you don't need to pay your council tax, and we're not going to do anything about it if you don't. And if that situation occurs, the city will be in dire trouble. Surely a more sensible thing the council ought to be doing, and this obviously isn't a matter for scrutiny, is looking at reducing the council tax for people in the next financial year so that they don't have such a huge burden, because the council tax is a massive burden for a lot of people in this city.
Comment if you wish, Richard.
Well, it wasn't really...
There's no message going out that people don't need to pay their bills. I'm simply recognising the fact that in this situation there will be more people who do find themselves facing financial pressure. No policy, as I said, we need to take proper policy decisions about this, and no policy decisions have been taken yet. I can see that my colleague Lisa Taylor is indicating to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Lisa Taylor. I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Financial Performance and Insight, and I'm here this afternoon for Rebecca Hillard and Sarah Pitt. So I think at the moment, absolutely, as Richard said, we need to recognise that people may struggle. There is no plan at all at the moment to say people do not need to pay. That is not the message at all. We need to be mindful, and we need to work with people as they find themselves unable to pay. So there is no, just to be really reassuring, there is no plan to say you do not pay at this stage, but we will be keeping a close eye on where people are struggling and what support we can provide to them. I hope that gives some clarity to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. And I think that's got to the end of this item. So thank you again for this presentation, etc. this afternoon. there's lots of follow-up that needs to come forward as a consequence of the discussion here. Thank you both. Can I now move on to item 8, which is the scrutiny work programme? I'm conscious of the time. There may be therefore some matters which we should have perhaps explored under the work programme. I may have to look at beyond the meeting and take forward as chair's action if that proves to be necessary. But within the work programme, there are a number of issues I'd like to point up. For our October meeting, there will be a discussion on devolution that will inform the scrutiny inquiry, and members of the Employment and Skills Task and Finish Group need to be invited to that particular discussion. That's the first point. Also at the October meeting, we are intending to bring forward a report, and this was mentioned earlier, on the Customer Services Task and Finish Group. If, in fact, the small working group get matters or progress to a point where there should be a report back to October. I already mentioned the fact that under the work programme that we perhaps need the Housing and Neighbourhoods Overview and Scrutiny Committee to monitor that housing application backlog to make sure that it doesn't move upwards again after the good work done by the customer services team. I raised also earlier the issue of the city indicators being reported back, and we'll get the timetable on that hopefully communicated to us. We've just agreed, I hope acknowledged at least, that Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee in their work programme should look at the implications of the cost of living crisis. That's a matter that they could take up. The exempt accommodation report, which we had intended to take, I think it was November, because of availability, that will need to be deferred to December. I can confirm with you, given that particular change in coordinating's agenda, that there will be a report at the November meeting from the Council's corporate communications team. That has now been confirmed. And there is an update which I would like to bring forward to committee, an update on the Election Act that was reported following a report to committee in December 21, and therefore there is perhaps the need, but I'll look at it again outside of this meeting, for that to come forward, to come back to coordinating ONS. Now, I think I've covered the main points that I needed to draw your attention to, simply because the work programme has a degree of fluidity to it, and we need to somehow acknowledge that at the coordinating meeting. Christian, if I've missed something, please say so.
No, I was just going to say there was obviously a discussion about domestic abuse, and just looking at the work very much until the end of the year. I wonder if it would be sensible to sort of factor something in after speaking to the council year about making the new year sort of January onwards.
I'll leave that for outside of this meeting, Christian, that no doubt Kerry would want to talk to Alex and talk to yourselves, and between you, you'll come up with something, and then we'll slot it in at an appropriate time. Okay. Anything else anybody else wants to bring up under the work programme? Okay, in which case we can move on to requests for call-in or council call for action or petitions. I have no notification of any of that. Good, we can move on then to item 10, other urgent business. No, none, and therefore the date and time of the next meeting. is set for the 14th of October at 10:00 hours. And can I just, having said that, apologise for the arrangements around this meeting. We did have to postpone the meeting when it was originally set because of the death of Her Majesty the Queen. And the way around that, I was told at the time, is I had to get you not to turn up in order that the meeting could be made in quorum.
I'm surprised that wasn't a headline in the paper. Councillors refused to turn up for me.
But that was the only way to do it, I was informed. And therefore, when we came to this meeting, and I had a little problem that might be arising, I was having to think again about whether or not we could go forward with today's date. But by then the agenda had gone out and I couldn't actually postpone the meeting any further, et cetera, et cetera. So apologies for all that rigmarole over what should have been the previous scheduling of the meeting. But we are due to go ahead on the 14th of October next at 10. Yes, go on.
Just to pick up, members did have a briefing on the council framework. And there's been a request to bring an informal brief back to members in October to suggest that after the next committee meeting in October. So members are happy with that. I'll set that up after reading the bill to say we're applying for a meeting. We'll be able to say that.
Okay, or since we asked for the issue to be considered, we ought to duly accept the offer. Okay, authority to act between meetings, the usual motion, agree that? Thank you very much. Well, I've slipped it on beyond the 2 hours by 10 minutes, apologies for that. But we've covered a lot of business today.
Thank you, Chair.